Welcome to the ever-changing landscape of the PPP process. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the Director of the Compliance Department here at RSI. Today's webinar is going to go through the PPP forgiveness process and the updates that have come out recently. And then we're going to go through an example of RSI's PPP forgiveness reporting. So the PPP changes over time. First came the CARES Act, which was passed at the end of March. I believe March 27th. Then the PPP Flexibility Act, which was a couple months later at the beginning of June. And then along the way, there have been 24 Interim Final Rules issued by the Treasury and 77 SBA FAQs. Got the address down there if you want to check them out. And if you're looking for some late night reading and can't sleep, I would recommend that. And then, of course, everyone is waiting on the next round of stimulus, PPP 2, and that is sure to bring more changes. It is a question of when, not if, we get another stimulus bill similar in nature to the CARES Act. So there will be one, we just got to wait. With legislation regarding PPP 2 stalled in Congress, are there any other options for businesses that need funding? Yes. The Economic Impact Disaster Loans offered through the Small Business Administration, SBA, there's the website right there, are great options for small businesses. And the SBA is currently accepting applications for businesses impacted by COVID-19. Businesses with less than 500 employees qualify. And of course, employees of all businesses under common ownership would be aggregated to determine if a business was under this threshold. A qualified business can receive up to 2 months of operating capital to be used to pay fixed debt, which was in place before COVID-19, any accounts payable, and payroll, with a slight caveat we'll discuss here in 1 second. The funds cannot be used to pay for lost sales, for lost profits, to expand the business, or refinance existing debt, or the same items paid with PPP funds. Now, if your PPP covered period is over, you've used all those funds for payroll, these idle loans or funds can be used to pay for payroll outside of the PPP covered period. Some pros and cons of an idle. The loan is intended to maintain the operational expenses before COVID occurred. So there's a much broader list of expenses that can be paid with an idle loan. Payments can be deferred for up to 1 year. Interest rates will not exceed 4% with terms up to 30 years. And unlike the PPP, there are no time restrictions on when the funds must be used. Cons. Unlike the PPP, this is a loan and must be paid back. There is collateral required on loans above $25,000. And there is a personal guarantee on loans above $200,000. But please note the application process can take up to 10 weeks and another 5 to 10 days to receive the loan proceeds after approval. So don't waste any time if this sounds like a good option for your business. Apply at www.sba.gov/disaster. All right, moving on to the next slide, some common questions on everyone's mind regarding forgiveness. First question, should I use an 8-week or 24-week covered period? And the answer is the period that gives you the best result is the period that should be used when applying for forgiveness. RSI will provide calculations for both 8-week and 24-week covered period so you can make the best decision for your business. Next question is, can a borrower use only payroll expenses when applying for forgiveness? Yes. And this will actually streamline the process for any borrower that can do this because there are different reporting requirements for non-payroll costs. And we'll go over that at the end of this, towards the end of the. Next question, the forgiveness application applications have an expiration date of 10/31/2020. Does this date have any bearing on when a borrower needs to apply for forgiveness? The answer is no. Borrowers may apply for forgiveness anytime up until the maturity of the loan. However, if a borrower does not apply for loan forgiveness within 10 months after the last day of the borrower's loan forgiveness covered period, loan payments are no longer deferred and the borrower must begin making payments on the loan. For example, a borrower whose covered period ends on October 30th, 2020 has until August 30th of 2021 to apply for forgiveness before the loan repayment begins. So that expiration date on there has nothing to do with when a borrower needs to begin making payments or must apply for forgiveness. Next question, when are borrowers required to begin making payments? Well, the PPP Flexibility Act automatically applies to all PPP loans. When the PPP first came out, the payments needed to be made 6 months from when you received the loan. The PPP Flexibility Act changed that and says payments don't need to start until 10 months from the end of the covered period, which could be 24 weeks. If your period ends on October 30th, you have until August 30th till you have to start making payments. Next question, what happens if my full loan is not forgiven? If only a portion of the loan is forgiven, or if the forgiveness application is denied, any remaining balance, including accrued interest due on the loan, must be repaid by the borrower on or before the maturity date. So if your loan is not forgiven, you will have to pay it back. Next question, will I be responsible for any accrued interest charged before the loan was forgiven? The answer is interest does accrue during the time between the disbursement of the loan and the forgiveness of the loan. However, the borrower is only responsible for paying the accrued interest on the amount of the loan that is not forgiven. So you will only pay interest on the amounts that were not forgiven. Right, are there any exceptions for restaurants that have not been able to get back up to pre-COVID staffing levels? And the answer is yes. The FTE reduction safe harbor number 1 exempts business from the FTE reduction calculation. And these restaurants that are exempted were impacted by restrictions set forth due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, no indoor seating or limited indoor seating and to-go orders only. Any restrictions like that would qualify you for FTE reduction safe harbor number 1. But please note you will need a copy of the order or notice that limited your business activities when applying for forgiveness to qualify for this safe harbor. I'm sure your bank will want to see that. All right, RSI has a forgiveness report that we are working on currently. It is still in development. The reports will contain calculations and data that are required on the PPP Schedule A and supporting tables. Data that RSI will be providing will cover cash compensation from line 1 and line 4 on PPP Schedule A worksheet, the average FTE count on line 2 and line 5 of PPP Schedule A worksheet, salary hourly wage reduction calculation on line 3 PPP Schedule A worksheet, the employer paid state and local taxes, which appears on line 8 of the PPP Schedule A worksheet, compensation to owners if they're paid through payroll in RSI will be reported on line 9 PPP Schedule A worksheet. For example, an owner of a partnership would not be paid through payroll, so they would not show up on this report. The total payroll costs with a couple of limitations will be reported on line 10 PPP Schedule A worksheet. And those limitations are things that are outside of the scope of this report, like employer contributions to health insurance and retirement plans. Those two pieces of data we don't have in RSI, and we don't know what was paid by the employer for employees' health insurance. We're not talking about employee deductions. We're talking about the cost to employers for their employees' health insurance. That information RSI does not have, but that is part of total payroll costs. And the same goes for retirement plans. RSI does not know what funds were paid for retirement matching expense for your employees during this period. So those two pieces of information will need to be supplied and added to the total payroll cost. The last one is the Fte Reduction Quotient, if applicable. Remember, there's that Fte Reduction Safe Harbor number 1. So hopefully lines 11, 12, and 13 PPP Schedule A worksheet do not apply to you, and you will not have to worry about that. And here to the left is an example from testing. This is still in development. This is not the finished product, but it gives you an idea of what these reports will look like. You got the start date of the covered period. We show you the 8-week end date, the 24-week end date, and then this report down here shows that Tom Brady's not had a very good year and only made $30 in compensation for PPP forgiveness. Now, these reports are quite complex and require extensive time for developing and testing. Currently, my best estimate for completion is towards the end of November. I'm hoping we get it done sooner, but it's looking like the end of November. But in the meantime, there are some things that we can start putting together, because there's documents that you'll need to claim certain non-payroll expenses on your PPP forgiveness application. So for business mortgage interest payments, in order to claim this as a non-payroll expense, you'll need a copy of the lender amortization schedule and receipts or canceled checks verifying eligible payments from the covered period. For business rent or lease payments to be claimed as non-payroll expenses, you'll need a copy of current lease agreement and receipts or canceled checks verifying eligible payments from the covered period. And then lastly, the business utility payments, in order to claim those as non-payroll expenses, you will need copies of the invoices or account statements from February 2020 and those paid during the covered period, and the receipts or canceled checks. So there's a lot more reporting requirements for non-payroll expenses. So one of the questions earlier is, can I use 100% of my payroll costs for forgiveness? The answer was yes, and this is why that would streamline the process. You don't have to put together all these documents to claim non-payroll expenses. So with these documents right here, you can start the process now putting together so that when RSI's reports are done, you're ready to apply for forgiveness. But you need to make sure that you're applying for forgiveness in the correct year, because the tax planning model for 2020, fingers crossed, hope for the best outcome and tax plan for the worst outcome. Preparing for year end with PPP forgiveness in mind. Well, currently, the expenses paid with forgiven, this is only forgiven, expenses paid with forgiven PPP funds are not deductible. So if you apply for forgiveness and are granted forgiveness in 2020, currently you have two options. The first option is you could delay filing your 2020 return as long as possible, file extensions, in hopes that Congress makes the necessary changes to the legislation and indicates that the expenses paid with forgiven PPP funds are deductible on your year-end return. Currently, they are not. So you could wait as long as possible. Or the other option, if you receive forgiveness in 2020, you follow current law, you take no deductions for expenses paid with the forgiven PPP funds. And if the law changes next year, the year after, I don't think it'll change the year after, but if it changes next year, you can amend your 2020 return and obtain a refund. Now, once again, this was if you apply and receive forgiveness in 2020. If you don't apply for forgiveness until 2021, these options, there are more options for you if you don't apply until 2021, because you're not sure when you file your 2020 return if you're going to get the PPP funds forgiven. So this is a huge, huge issue right now in Washington, and Congress needs to get together and change the law so that these expenses paid with forgiven PPP funds are deductible. But like I said, as it stands right now, they're not. So those are basically the two choices that you have when filing your year-end return. And then if you have any questions, please send an email to compliance@rsiaccounting.com or send a support request to the RSI compliance team. Once again, my name is Brian Smith. Thank you for your time today. Stay positive and take care.